Mm, Good morning. Have you heard the story of the dog and the toad? It's a fable. And it goes something along the lines of this. I've heard a few variations, but this is one I'm going to choose for today. God is facing a decision between life and death. And there's a few options. One is immortality, right? The idea that you'll live forever. But the problem is with immortality, you lose the taste of what is living, etc. Right? The other one is to have actual death, right? So immortality can come in a number of shapes. It can be to live young forever. It can be to never die, or it can be to reincarnated, right? Whereas death is the idea of ending. So God is being challenged with this, and he asks the villagers. He says, "Listen, okay, I'm going to give you the option, and I want you to decide amongst yourselves, and then tell me which one you want, because each of them has perks and troughs, curses and blessings, right?" So one day, the villagers task themselves with a choice, and they decide that even they are struggling with this. And so they give the power to a race. They say to the dog, "We want you to carry the message of immortality. We want you to let God know that we want to live forever." And to the toad, they said, "We want to give you the message of death," thinking to themselves that, you know, the dog is really going to win. Um, and they sent the dog and the toad are heading towards heaven to give God the message of what the humans want: immortality or death. Along the way, the dog gets hungry and he veers off looking for food, and he finds this wilderness of all these kind of juicy things, right? And he goes off and he starts eating, and he eats and he eats and he eats. He soon falls asleep. Some time passes and he wakes up and he's back in the race. He thinks to himself, "Where's the toad?" He looks all the way back at the beginning, finishing at starting line, can't see him. Looks towards heaven on the road ahead of him, can't see him still. And so he says, "Okay, easy. I was able to not only um, get this amazing message, which the villagers are going to praise me for, but I also got to eat this food. I got to nap, and I can just continue." So he carries on the road, but he's heavy now. His waist is much bigger, so it's slower. As he gets towards heaven, he starts to hear these sounds, these cries. He gets to the gates and he realizes the truth of the matter. He'd fallen asleep and the toad had passed him. The toad had got the message first, the message of death, the idea of ending. And it had been taken by God as the decree from the humans that this was their answer to their choice. And therein entered death into the story of life. The reason why I'm telling you this story is that this is day 6 of the fear, the 6 major fears series that I'm doing for Ikdane. And I did a talk. I'm part of the directorship for Damali Beautiful Visions, which is a community interest company that supports families who've experienced sudden bereavement of a young child. And one day I was asked to speak about death and what it means. It was a topic I was not looking forward to speaking about. I'm not going to lie. It can be very triggering for many, but in a room like that, it's going to be triggering for most. So I had to handle it delicately. And I started with that story. But one of the things that came from the discussion afterwards is the idea of what death actually is, what it means, and the way that we respond to it based on what we believe around it. And that's part of what I'm going to be talking about today, because death itself, you are, is still going to be something that is cloaked in grief. It's the loss of something. One of the things that I was asked once before is like, yeah, but if you believe in heaven, then why is it such a bad thing when someone dies? And the answer I gave to that is that you're not necessarily just crying because they're going to heaven, because that's the celebratory part. That's great. They've been released from any kind of pain or suffering they've had on earth. They're going to be singing amongst the angels. They're going to have a party when they come home. There's not going to be any illness, any fear, any of that stuff on the other side. That part is incredible. But the thing that is, I think, what we challenge with the most is what they leave behind once they leave, i.e., us, and us having to continue our lives here without them. And the bigger the role they have in our lives, the more difficult it can be to let them go. And I don't think they necessarily need to be like our immediate family to experience grief. I think they can be a mentor. They can be someone who you look up to, someone that means something to you. They can just be someone who may have had one conversation with you, but had an impact in your life through it. It can be anything, right? And then the question, of course, is then if we're talking about grief, then what is it the grief of? Grief for me is a loss, fear of loss, right? But then the question is, fear of loss of what? When we talk about grief, most of the time we're talking about fear of the loss of a person, right? We're talking about fear of loss of a loved one, talking about fear of loss of someone who is close to us. But grief itself isn't just the fear of a person. It could be the fear of loss of anything, fear of the loss of the idea of something you've been working towards, the fear of the loss of a person that you used to be. Like through life, we go through different stages, right? You're a child. When you become a teenager, you lose your child self. When you become an adult, you lose your teenage self. When you become working, you lose part of your like innocence and nonchalance, and all of a sudden you have to think about taxes and numbers and all this kind of stuff. When you become a parent, a husband or a wife, you lose part of that individual freedom self. And then when you become a parent, you lose a little bit of that partner self, that husband and wife self, when you're giving your energy towards a new being that you brought into the world, right? So there's fear of loss of something at each stage of our lives. I'm reminded of someone who was going through something that I recognize. I felt like they were going through something where they had had a child at a young age, and they were struggling with losing their independence. They were someone who would be like a on TikTok all the time and be, going out with their friends whenever they want. And all of a sudden they had this huge responsibility on their shoulders, which meant a huge change in their lifestyle, in who they are as a person. They couldn't be carefree anymore. They felt like they couldn't be carefree anymore. They had to take care of this life that was here because of them. And they were really struggling with that. And that was showing up in different changes of behavior. They were going missing a lot. They were having outbursts of anger. They were having hatred towards the child, all kinds of stuff, which is a real thing, by the way. And like viewing this from the outside, I had to really, really reflect on what they're going through. And I felt for them, because when you do come through these changes, especially if you feel like there's a level of something which is cloaked in your identity with something, that kind of level of attachment, and then that leaves, the question is, who am I without that thing? Yeah, who am I without that person? That person has always been there for me. They've been my rock. They've been my stability. They've been my support system. They've been the only person I can trust, the only person I go to. What happens when they leave me behind? How can I build another relationship like that with somebody else? How can I find love again? How can I find security or trust again? They have left with that part of me. And then there's this reconciliation, that rebuilding that needs to happen, where we not only rebuild the ability to connect with something the same way again, or it may never be the same way again, but to connect again. But to be able to do that, for me, I think the hardest part is not just grabbing onto something new, but letting go of something of the past. And that whole process can be built in all kinds of different things. It can be talking about forgiveness. It could be talking about um, existential concerns, like what do you do if this is like I said before, who am I without this thing? Forgiveness of them, forgiveness of yourself, anything that has been left unsaid or undone. All those kind of things can come up when that grief is faced, but we have to face it to be able to move into a new stage of our lives. And I would want to, as I'm going into this, I think I should have given this like a trigger warning, I think, because it's something that I think many of us struggle with, especially those who have experienced it at a close level. Someone close to you has passed away and you have struggled with it till this day. Nothing has been the same without them. You know, food tastes different. You still have flashbacks of good times. You know, I heard this. There's a guy I follow online who talks about grief a lot. That's literally what he does. And the way he explained something was, it was, it was beautiful, but it made me really reflect for quite some time. He said, grief is like having a hotel or a restaurant which is full of seats, but then grief will make you believe that it has bought the place out, right? It is for the night, right? It's taken every seat in the room. But then what ends up happening is sometimes we need to give up one of those seats for joy, for hope. Um, and sometimes we can struggle to do that. It's like, actually, no, this was booked by grief. Sorry. There's no room. And there's can be guilt when you don't feel that grief for even if for a brief moment. It's like, what does it mean for me not to feel guilty? Like, you know, this person's left. I owe them to be upset all the time just to prove how much they meant to me. Um, but I sometimes wonder, like, if I was that person, would I want them to stay in this state? In reverse, do we believe that they would actually want us to stay in this state? There was a question recently about, there was a husband and wife who were talking to each other about what would happen if they were to pass away. Like, would they be okay with the other person finding love again? And the woman said something beautiful. She was like, you have an incredible love to give. Like, what I've experienced from you, I would not want to keep from another human being. I think you have a special type of love that isn't spoken about enough, and I don't think people even know it exists. And for me to be selfish enough to um not allow you to give that to someone else who needs it would be selfish of me. And I sat there, I paused the video because I was like, wow, what a way to describe it. Like, me thinking to myself, as the person who's leaving, what you've given me, I can't imagine holding it to myself, even though I'm not here anymore. That you must give it to someone else. That is quite a mentality to have that I really had to sit with for a while, because the guy's response was something completely different. He said, there is no way that you are giving that to anybody else, right? And speaking about it in the comments were people who are like, oh, this is man's territorial thing, and you know, he's such a whatever for thinking this way. But let's be honest, like, it's not just men who might think that way, right? We all do in some way, shape, or form. Like, you're almost scared to, what if I leave and then they love again and then they may find something better? Who knows, right? All these kind of things can come up. And one of the things I'm really big on, which is one of the reasons why I'm using this platform like this, is trying to talk about the stuff that we don't necessarily talk about all the time and be real about it. I think we can do ourselves a disservice if we make everything sound like a fantasy. Like, death, loss, endings are real. And I think part of why we experience things the way we do here in the West is because we have no framework to deal with it. Back home in Sierra Leone, you have 40 days and 40 nights of grieving before you go back into the world, right? Here, you might have a couple of days off, might, depending on your employer. You might have a couple of days off, right? But back home, you have a series of events, of sequences, of things that will bring you through all these emotions, right? It's a grief cycle for a reason, right? You might be at a different place in the cycle. You might be experiencing anger, hurt, sadness. You might experience joys in the middle. Like, this person was a great human being. We had great times. We went through all these adventures together. We did all these things. Like, sometimes you want to, you like feel drawn back to that memory that was so exciting to you, that laughter where you would laugh to the point where your whole stomach feels like it's opening up and spurting out rainbows and things, and you felt like there was not a care in the world when you're sat beside that person, right? And you just have a flicker of that memory, and just a little bit of light cracks through the door, just enough for you to feel light again, even if for a moment. And then you feel guilty for even having that thought, or for even feeling that way, and then it pulls you all the way back. I've got a comment here that says, great talk this morning. This is an important conversation. Got to go, but have a great live. Thank you. Really appreciate it, man. Really appreciate it. And there was another grief. I remember I had a breakup, which was difficult for me. And I said to her, the hardest part is not letting go of who we are, but who I thought we were going to be. And I think that was probably the most honest way I could put it. Like, I genuinely felt like, okay, letting go of you, I've felt it coming for a while or whatever, and I have dealt with it, right? But letting go of who I thought we were going to be together, what we were going to do, where we were going to go, how we were going to experience life, what we were going to bring into the world, the change that was going to happen from our union, like all this kind of stuff, that was something I really struggled with, really struggled with. And I think that is one of the things about grief as well. Like I said before, it can sometimes not just be the part of letting go of the now, but what it was attached to. A few notes here I'm going to go through, right? So there's universal fear, I feel, that stems from the fear of the unknown. What am I without this thing? Fear of loss and existential concerns about the meaning of life. I've said it time and time again. One of the curses and blessings of being human is this prefrontal cortex, this ability for us to think like we do, to feel like we do, to attach meaning like we do. And it can be a curse and a blessing if we don't know how to manage it. It can lead to anxiety about mortality, the avoidance of discussions about death. I had another talk where we're talking about how I feel like death should be part of a curriculum. Like, we should actually teach about it. You know, what does it mean? What do different nations, communities believe about it? There's a movie called Coco on Disney Plus, and it's about death, but within the Mexican community, right? And how you have the whole celebration and what they believe about going over to the afterlife. And what keeps them alive in the afterlife is how long people speak about them in this life, which is why you have these shrines, which you give penance to and all this kind of stuff, because you're keeping their memory alive. They only really die when they stop being remembered. And I thought that was such a powerful message, powerful cultural tradition to have communicated in the way that they did. Obviously, there was fun, there was adventure and all that kind of stuff. But the message of that was, wow, I thought that was really powerful. And so the question is, like, what does ending, what do endings mean to you? What do they look like? What do they feel like? Um, yes, Aisha in the building, what's going on? Welcome. And I'm reminded of something that you taught me actually about the cycle of life. I think I can't remember what it was called, but it was birth, it was growth, it was death, and it was rebirth. And you asked us a question, I think, which is like, whereabouts on this cycle are you with different things? You know, um, whether it's a project, whether it's your, your where you are in terms of life. Are you in a season of life, but growth, death, or rebirth? And what does it mean for you to go through these transitions in a complex way? Because you could be in a stage of birth in one area of your life, but in a position of death in another area of your life. What does it feel like to hold two truths within your body, right? A lot of these things that we just don't talk about a lot, and I think it's so important. And Aisha, I told the story of the dog and the toad at the beginning of the session, um, about how that was brought into the world. Um, One of the things I wanted to talk about as well is it can manifest into a constant sense of urgency. We spoke about that before with the fear of old age. It can bring this sense of urgency. One of the things that a lot of people talk about is when they experience loss or death in any kind of way, they realize how fleeting life is. And you hear it a lot. It's like, it made me realize how much I have and how to live in the moment and all these kind of things. But then we tend to, I'm not going to say only, but sometimes it's magnified in those moments. But then as time goes on, we kind of almost forget those messages until the next time we experience loss. So I sometimes wonder how it would look to keep these things alive. It's like, okay, maybe I don't have to wait until I lose them to be able to tell them I love them. Maybe I don't have to wait until I lose it to actually be in the moment and experience how good an experience it is. You know, we all go Aisha says, yes, King, we all go 360, and sometimes we come back with higher learning, which I call our next level of ascension. Absolutely. And I think sometimes the cycle isn't just in a 2D plane, which is what you're talking about. It can be a 3D plane, right? So after you've experienced that grief, and there's this idea that as well, it's like once you experience these things, you're never the same again. So in the same way as how we have the idea of a solar system just going around like this, when actually if it's traveling around, an expanding universe, then it's actually not so much this, it's more this, right? Because everything is traveling, which is can be the same with grief. Like, you deal with your grief cycle, but it's not like this. It's actually like this. Because once you get to the end of a cycle, you weren't where you began. There's been some kind of change, some kind of growth, some kind of transition or transmutation, some translation, some transformation is the word I was looking for with all of them we had there, right? It can have that fear of urgency, it can have the fear of wasting time, fear and preoccupation with legacy and accomplishments. So you're thinking to yourself, I need to do this before the time runs out, which can add pressure, right? And then with that pressure, add stress. With stress means cortisol. With cortisol, undealt with means toxic levels of it within our body, which can lead to burnout, changes in emotion, physical, mental capacity, behavior, all those things, right? So this is how these are all connected to burnout. When we have an active fear of death that we carry with us in our day to day, it can result in burnout by causing that level of stress because it is touched to everything, right? And sometimes you speak to people and they talk about how, actually being aware of death is what makes me so connected to life. It's because it's fleeting. I think about vampires, the way they describe them in the movies, and it's funny. Like Dracula is one of the most famous vampires, right? We talk about him a lot, but if you read Bram Stoker's version, he has a sense of humanity about him, which is very interesting. Not just with him, but with how he deals with his community, should we say? And there's this idea of, what if you can't die? You don't experience life anymore. Like, you are just there's a difference between being awake and alive, and actually feeling vitality. I think vitality is the thing that's missing, right? After a while. Got another comment here where I say, yes, why, hence why I mentioned ascension, i.e. moving up. Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the other things it can cause is workaholism, burnout, and a lack of self-care due to fear of running out of time to achieve your goals. You put goals in such a high place, which could be above any of your other, what's the word I'm looking for? Any of your other values, that it helps us towards burnout. Okay, I need to accrue this much. I need to gather this much before I leave. One of the things about the ancient Egyptians is they believed that you take into the afterlife what you carry in life, right? Now, if you dig up those tombs, you find out that that may not be true. Their bodies are still there. Their bones are still there. The gold is still there. The tables, the staffs, all that kind of stuff is still in the tombs. But their life force is not. So then the question is, what do you bring with you? And a lot of this, again, I actually encourage anyone who's living in the West to look back and actually think about what you believe about it, and think about how that will affect your navigation through not only your life, but how you show up in other people's. We have another comment that says, have a blessed day. Great topic and delivery. Keep up the great work. Thank you. And I'll be saving this as well on YouTube, LinkedIn, if anyone wants to go through it again, and leave any comments as well. Any thoughts you feel about it, because I know it's a difficult topic and I'm trying to navigate it in a way that it doesn't become too triggering. But it's one of those things where I feel like any trigger, if we don't address it, then it becomes takes on a bigger hold of our lives. And it's not like death is never you're gonna get to a point where it never has a hold on your life, but how it affects us can be different depending on what we believe about it, and if we actually face it at all. And this is me talking about death, but I'm talking about grief in general, loss in general. Like, how do we experience loss? Like, if you're going through a breakup, do you believe you're still human? What is it that's left after they leave? Have you had so much of your life tied up in this person that there's nothing left when they leave with those things that they go with it? Or are you aware that they can't leave with those things? Those things that you experience while you're with that person is actually still attainable without them. Who you are with that person is still accessible without that person, because otherwise, if it was never within you, then it would have never shown. And so how do you come to terms with that? How do you build that person without that person? One of the things that I found really important about living alone is I'm able to experience joy, sadness, comfort, affection, all these kind of things without anybody else. I've been able to generate these things that I've needs and meet my needs alone. And there's a curse and a blessing about that. The curse is that I sometimes wonder how I'm going to be like when I'm in a partnership now, because I know I've got all these things down. Like, I don't have to worry about all of that. But then the blessing is as well is that I don't have to leave that burden on someone else. I don't want to say that person is my peace, that person is my joy, because if that person was to leave, then it means I no longer have peace and joy, right? No, I am my peace. I am my joy. And I just get to show it in a certain way with this person. Um, yeah, it's just something to think about, like I was thinking about earlier. Um, Michelle, good to have you here. Any thoughts and stuff and questions or anything, put them in the comments. There was an analogy that I heard, another one that I'm really trying to remember. If it comes up, I'll share it. So then what do we do about it? If you're experiencing a fear of loss, a fear of grief, fear of death, what do we do about it? And I've got 6 things here as usual. Number one is to practice acceptance. Acceptance is probably one of the later elements of, on the grief cycle, which is also one of them on. Yeah, I feel like acceptance is one of the last points on many of them, even in things like Alcoholics Anonymous, right? When you're going through your 12 steps, acceptance is one of them. Grief on your steps, acceptance is one of them. Acceptance means you accept. It's not that you're happy with it, it's that you accept that this is real. You accept the reality of it, right? Because one of the things that keeps us in this state of fear of it is we deny it. And denial is one of the earlier parts of this cycle, is we just don't believe it. Either we don't want to, or we can't bring ourselves to believe the truth of it. You know, if we find out something's happened, we're like, no, it can't be. I spoke to them yesterday. Like I remember when my extended cousins passed away, and it was really immediate. It was sudden. You know, they're at a party one moment, and then we get the call to say he never reached home. And I'd spoken to him like a week or so before, like just really randomly as well. Like we just cracked jokes and stuff like that. He was always the life of the party. And I thought, no, it can't be gone. Like I spoke to him last week. Like, here's the evidence, you know? And one of the things that we did when we spoke about him, we talked about all the stories that we had with him. And we just remembered how much of a example of a person he was. And we actually celebrated his life. Even though he was young, he had such a full life. We were able to celebrate him in that moment. All of us as a family, we were in tears of laughter, you know, little things that he did and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I was just like, I remember reflecting even in the moment, like, wow, this is incredible to have such an impact on so many people, that even in the face of loss, you had so much positive that we actually like joyful about the memory of you. And I sometimes wonder to myself, like I can only pray that I have that effect on people. Like I wouldn't want someone to stay in grief for the rest of their life. If I was to be taken from here, to leave here, I would want them to have so much joy from the lessons they learned from me, that that is what they remember. That's what they take on, that there'll be a positive change in their life as a result. I would love to have that effect on people, even in my absence. So practice the acceptance of the impermanence of life and the inevitability of it. It's inevitable, right? We can prolong our life. We can live, you know, even in the blue zones in the world, places like Okinawa, like I spoke about in the last live, where they have people in their hundreds, you know, still living, still vital, you know, vitality levels still through the roof. They're still being active, still going in their daily runs and eating well and healthy and all that kind of stuff. But even them at some point will pass away. Even if you look at old school biblical times, they'll live for hundreds of years, but at some point they will come to an end, right? It's inevitable at some point. And if, because it's inevitable, if we don't deal with it, then it's always going to be chasing us. It's always going to be there. And like I said earlier, I think it's a disservice here in the West that we don't have as much support, as much process involved. Like if you're in the Caribbean, you have 9 nights. I told about back home in Sierra Leone, you might have 40 days and nights of all these rituals, processes that you go through to help people through this experience. Whereas in the West, I've seen it happen where someone might lose someone and everyone is like, okay, cool, they're grieving, let me leave them alone. Leave them alone? Like that's when they need you the most. Or maybe it's just my understanding of it, but you know, when I'm experiencing loss is when I need people around me the most. Like you're at the most fragile in that moment, you know. I've got another comment. We will have found memories of all the good you shared and how you were there for us. I appreciate that. I'm glad. I'm actually glad. I'm glad. Yeah, and it is something I do think about. Number 2 on how to recover from the fear of death, to avoid burnout, is engaging in conversations about death like this and mortality, to normalize the topic and reduce fear of, and stigma. And again, it's not about making things seem okay. It's about normalizing it and noticing that it is a part of life. Death is a part of life. And one of the things that I would also encourage you to think about is what it actually means. Like one of the other things I mentioned in that talk is that often when you talk about it in these traditional communities, death isn't an end, it's a transition into something else. So you're going back to source, you're becoming an ancestor, you're going into heaven, you're um becoming a new animal or something like that. You're coming back as something else. It's very rarely the end. It very rarely just stops. There's something that it passes into. Even I talked about I think it was Newton's law. um the idea is energy isn't created, it can only change, right? So if you are alive right now, that vitality I mentioned with the ancient Egyptians and stuff, it's not there anymore. It's not in their bodies, they're not walking around, but it transitioned into something else, right? It moves somewhere else. It's still there, but it's transitioned into something else. For you, it might be heaven, it might be something else. Do you believe that God will put an end to suffering one day, and it's as it's written in the Bible? Me personally, yeah. Yeah, I do. I do. And there's elements of things that I don't necessarily understand, and I think maybe I won't understand until things actually happen. Um, I'm conscious of, like, so for example, the idea of ghosts is an interesting conversation, right? Because it means that there's a transitionary page between life and death, for example. And so a lot of people experience this thing where they might be living there and they feel the presence of someone who's no longer there. And then the question is, what is it? I feel that comfort that they would usually bring. I feel that joy that they would usually bring. I can almost hear their laughter, all that kind of stuff. And the mind is a strong thing, right? And so is the heart. And we can have these memories. And I think memory is something that's phenomenal. Like the more research I do into memory, the more I feel like maybe there's some connection with that and burnout as well. It's like how time can distort with memory in such that we can feel the past in the present. And there's an element of memory which is so tangible that it's not just a thought anymore. Like you can actually feel it. So, and that's how triggers work, right? You think about something that someone wronged you with, and you instantly feel this surge of anger within your body as if it happened just a minute ago. And that memory, you can feel, touch, taste things. Like, if you I'm often reminded of a Methodist Overseas guest house that I grew up in, and there are certain smells, certain tastes that take me back there in terms of memory. And what happens if that memory is of someone who's not here anymore? How do we deal with that? Like, I'll be going through my phone and I still have that number on speed dial, for example. Like, there's lots of things that we can look into. It's like, what does it mean? I think one of the most dangerous things we can do is run away from concepts like this. And I'm not saying any of it is easy either. Like, I think it's so difficult. Like, I mean, I've shared some of my experiences and maybe haven't gone into how it affected me. I remember my uncle passed away, and I realized he was the only real, at that time, um, man in my life. And I had to experience the loss of that, experience the loss of a father figure who I didn't recognize as the father figure when he was alive. And even to this day, I still think about that. I sometimes think, like, I really missed that opportunity to build a strong bond with someone who could teach me something about what it is to be a man in this world, right? And a lot of that we have to come to terms with. Some of it to let go of, some of it to, what can you grasp about it that will serve you, though? What is it about that life that was lived that you can take into the future and do something with in a positive way? How can it affect you, right? So, number one is practicing acceptance of the impermanence of life and the inevitability of death as a natural part of existence. Number two is engaging in conversation about death and mortality to normalize the topic and reduce fear and stigma. Number three is reflecting on your values, beliefs, and priorities to live a purposeful and meaningful life. And this is what often happens, right? We experience death or loss in some kind of way, and we get to a stage where we're like, okay, this has shaken me, but this can rebuild me. We talked about it before. Aisha was talking about elevation, getting to a new level of experience as a result of that. Yeah. So how can I live purposefully and meaningfully so that the life I do live is something that is extraordinary, right? And I don't get to the end of it wishing I had done this or miss or feeling, you know, like I've missed or I could have done X, Y, and Z. Number four is seeking spiritual or existential guidance to a meaning of life and death. And for me personally, this has been a big one. What does death actually mean to you? What do endings mean to you? The biggest one for me personally, the biggest shift is what I mentioned before, the question of who am I without this thing? If I believe they are my hope, my peace, my joy, then it means that if I'm no longer to have them, then it means they leave with it. If I believe that I am or I have like my foundation of hope and joy is in God or me or whatever it is, it means that as long as I'm here, I still have that. That is part of my identity. It's not tied up in them, which means that all they did was show me it in myself. They gave me opportunity for it to be and rise to the surface, as opposed to they actually had ownership of it. Number five is cultivating a sense of gratitude and appreciation for the present, the gift of life. And they say, like, past versus future, and present is called the present because it's a gift. I had this, I was watching this video recently and it made this thing, which is like such an interesting way to look at things. It was talking about time. And I realized for me, time isn't linear for me. I find it not difficult, but my mind doesn't think in chronological order sometimes. I think in snapshots, like very vivid pictures of experiences. And I don't necessarily link this experience to that experience being one before or after. They just are. And I remember seeing this video, and the guy was talking about time, and he said, okay, how long is the past? And they said, infinite. They said, okay, how long is the future? Infinite again. They said, how long is the present? And the guy was like, oh, it's just a moment. It's like, oh, interesting. Okay, so let's explore that. It's just a moment. How many moments are there? Infinite. And so the present is actually an infinite state. And if we don't experience it, then we'll constantly be in this other infinite state of past or future, which we all have access to, but not in body. Our body is always in the state of presence. It's whether our mind and our heart and our spirit are attached to that state enough for us to experience it or not. There's the question. Yes, Aline. So good to see you. Welcome. The last point is engaging in mindfulness practices to stay grounded and present in the face of existential fears. Like, one of the things about grounding, right, is just to remember that you're here, right? Good morning, longest time. Good to see you. Always a pleasure. It's been a while. Engaging in mindfulness practices to stay grounded and present in the face of existential fears, right? When these things about, what is life after death? What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be a good person, a human? What is my role in all of this kind of stuff? These are existential questions, right? Like, who are we in the grand scheme of things in the universe, etc.? That can take you away from the present into a state of doubt, the unknown, loss. It can existential concerns, all those kind of things. So as much as it is important for us to think about these things, so we at least know where we stand on those things, it's also important to have a balance with the present, and so we can actually experience things right now. What do we have? Who are we without these things? Actually, this is going full circle to my first session when I talked about the experience I had with my therapist, where he was asking me, without these things that you do, or who you are with all these people, I'm a friend, I'm a brother, I'm a son, I'm a nephew, I'm a godfather, I'm an architect, I'm a executive coach, I'm a dancer, I'm a, support system, I'm a mentor, I'm all these things. It's like, who are you without those things? And is the person who's left enough for you? To this day, I don't think I'll ever forget that question. Such a phenomenal question. Who are you without these things that you are to other people, for example? And is the person that's left without them enough for you? And if you link that to what I said before, all these things that you experience are not because of other people. It's because they were always in you, and those other people just gave opportunity for those things to rise to the surface. I'll give you an example. I consider myself to be a good guy, a nice guy. I'm happy, joyful, all that kind of stuff. But there have been people who have brought anger from me, right? And I don't think that they have control over me enough to just create the anger in me. The anger was always there. It's just that they did things to bring it to the surface. In the same way, joy is always there. Hope is always there. It's just that certain people and certain experience bring those things up in me into that present moment. And then I feel it tangibly in my body, in my mind, in my spirit. But when they leave, that thing doesn't leave with them because they never owned it. That was actually mine. So, for example, if I have somebody where I've never felt so alive in their presence, I feel comfortable, I feel sacred, I feel safe in their presence, and then I lose that person, there can be this moment where I feel like I lose my presence, lose my safety, lose my sacredness, when actually they just showed what was within. I am actually still safe. I am actually still sacred. I am actually still all those things without that person. And I always have been and always will be. It's just whether they just reminded me, looking at memory, reminded me that that was there. So I hope today has been helpful for you. If this is something you experienced before, um, condolences, man. Death is no easy topic to talk about. And I really had to, from the moment I talked about from day one, I was like, I knew this topic would come up, and I was like, how am I going to do it? So I hope I've done it some kind of service. I hope I've sowed a seed which can give you something that you can work with to know, okay, this is something that we talked about. But if I was to look at it in other way, if I was to attach a certain meaning to it, if I was to deal with it before the inevitable happens, then maybe when it happens, it won't have the effect on me that it's had before. Something that happens when you have something existential is the first time it can rock your world. It can rock your foundation of everything that you believe to be true. But the second, third, fourth, fifth, 100th time it happens, it doesn't have the same transformational effect because you've gone through it before and you know that you've survived. I think about Sierra Leone. We had 10 years of civil war, and the conversation about death back home is completely different to the conversation about death here. Like what we experience in Sierra Leone, I don't think it's tough, man. The level of death we experienced back in Sierra Leone is something that I still think about today. Something you still see the effects of when you walk around. We haven't dealt with it. But at the same time, we have dealt with it because we experience it so much. And yeah, attachment is the root of all suffering, 100%. Like I've spoke about the idea of letting go being a huge part of recovery from grief, recovery from burnout, all these kind of things is letting go. I think it's something that we don't really talk about. Like when we talk about burnout, it's often about the activities, it's the doing part. Oh, I've got 1,001 things to do and I'm tired already. I'm burning out. Yeah, that's part of it. But sometimes the question is like, what is the meaning that's attaching us to having a job that leads us to this place, to feeling like we need to take on all this stuff to try and get that raise, to feeling like we need to put work above family and all these other things that we hold valuable, to the point where we're hurtling towards this thing, to feeling like I am nothing without this role, or this role defines me, or this person defines me, or this role I have in another person's life defines me, right? Having all these things, so that, what happens when we lose those things? And are we ready to deal with who's left without them? Attachment is huge, and we don't realize that we're experiencing it. We often don't realize we're attached until we have to face the loss of it, and then we're rocked to our core. Yeah. So just a final one. Thank you for being here, everyone. Eileen, Steve, Ms. B, what's going on? Everyone who's here, thank you for being here and joining in the conversation. I'm incorporating these conversations into my morning routine. So I'm trying to keep them going, just because I feel like they're so important. They're so important, I'm finding, because we don't talk about them anywhere else, but they kind of they govern such a space in our lives. If there is an element of it that you've been triggered by, morning. I just want to give you some kind of support. It's not been easy talking about it. It's not been easy experiencing it. And it's not easy having it brought back into the presence. But I just encourage you that in many senses, endings are actually new beginnings. You might have to let go of who you are, but just imagine who you're going to be, who you could be, who you can be, who you are already. All these things that it has shown you about yourself, your resilience, your ability to have impact on other people's lives, your ability to connect, your ability to bring joy, hope, peace, to be people, to encourage peace in other people, to encourage change. Dre, you're here, right? And I always talk about maybe one of our favorite quotes. All that we touch, we change. All that we change changes us. The only lasting thing is change. Octavia Butler. And I think death is one of those things that can change us. And it can have such a profound effect on how we experience life, in a positive and sometimes challenging way. And yeah, so I encourage you to have a look at that. If it's something that's brought up something in you today, lean towards it, lean into it. See what fruit is being planted there, right? And come back to me. Let me know what your experiences are. I'm an executive coach, so I help people through burnout specifically. I help them with clarity, getting to a new level of success and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things I really specialize in is burnout recovery, partly because I've experienced it before at various levels, partly because I have dug so deep into it. I've seen things that people aren't talking about too much. And this week has been one of them, right? So the 6 basic fears, I haven't seen many people talking about it in this way, but I'm realizing the more I lean into it, the more impact, all the impact it does have on us. So thank you so much for giving up your time and sharing your time. If this is something that's been valuable to you, please share it with someone else, someone who might be experiencing grief or loss, or it might be you. Save it, put it into your references, right? And come back to it if you need that reminder again. What's going on? Welcome, New York in the house. Morning, everyone, or evening. Hold on, what time is it where you are? I'm trying to think of it. You must be either you've come back from a late night, or you're in another country, because is it not like 5:21 where you're at? Anyway, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good night. I have been Andre Bright, your executive coach, talking about the impact of the fear of death has on burnout. If you've missed it, rewind back to the beginning. I'm going to be saving this live on all the platforms: Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn. If you're struggling with it, give me a call. I offer on Wednesday, in fact, actually, If you have never 3 a.m. I want to. I'm gonna be DMing you in a minute. Yeah. I want to know um, if you've never experienced coaching before, or you feel like it's something that you would like to try. On Wednesday, I'm offering 30-minute laser coaching sessions. I've had a number of them last week, but it's at the reduced rate of £50 for 30 minutes. And it's just to give you a taste of what coaching is. So if you're experiencing burnout, if you need to help with clarity or leadership or any of those things, just book it. There's going to be a link in my bio, a link in the comments as well, but they're only on Wednesday for that price, just giving you the heads up. And you just go through it, you book the session, you pay. It's connected to my Monzo, so it's simple thing. It doesn't have to be complicated. And then we get into it. There's a couple of questions that you'll answer about how to make sure that the session is valuable for you, so I know what we're going to be experiencing together. And then we talk, right, for 30 minutes. I'll give you space. We'll hold space. I'm going to ask you questions. We're going to lean into the things that you might be challenged by. We'll find out what your blocks are, what you're experiencing, what the answers might be, what your next step might look like, and what your next action points are going to be. And the idea is, if you get to the end of it and you feel like you need more support like that, then we can talk about if you wanted to be a more long-standing client of mine. I do packages which are 3-month and 3, 6, and 12-month packages, which give you access to other stuff as well. There's retreats, there's monthly catch-ups, there's group calls, all those kind of things you'll have access to as well. If it interests you, then DM me, find the link, all those kind of things, and then we'll get you enrolled onto that, because I really want to help people, but I'm aware that sometimes it's cause he lives in it. Like what I charge for my sessions isn't something that some feel accessible at the moment. So I'm giving you the opportunity, £50 for 30 minutes, and it's a laser coaching session where we find we uncover the truths that are within you. Okay. So I hope you've enjoyed this time. I hope there's been a question that is raised that will effectively give you enough to think about today. Andre, just a reminder, I'm teaching house tonight at 5:30 p.m. UK time. So if anyone's there, the reason why I'm pointing that as well out here is I've had a whole session on how dance and joy is an important part of burnout recovery. Your physical activities can help release the stress within the body. That's why people go running and they feel better. That's why they do dance and yoga and Pilates and stuff, and they keep their bodies healthy, which can be a support system for the mind and the spirit and the heart, right? Especially when it comes to burnout. If you're not aware of how to deal with the stress within your body, then it can become consuming on top of the stressor that is causing the stress. So thank you, Adisa. So good to see you, man. And it's so dope that we met in Woolwich. I hope you're having an incredible growth in your career and your storytelling and your hosting and all those kind of things, man. Hopefully we'll be able to bump into each other soon, Woolwich. So if you're available around at any particular time, then maybe we can catch a coffee or something and catch up, man. It's been a long time. But again, Wednesday, book yourself in with me for a 30-minute laser coaching session. It's pretty much all day I'm giving. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Mr. Married Man, Mr. Romantic himself. Yeah. The love guru. Come on now. Yeah, let me leave now before I start losing my mind. I'm going to have breakfast. I'm going to do my morning workout, and I'm going to start my day. It is Monday. It's another opportunity. You have been this is how did he put it? You've reached your new personal best. Consecutive days alive. Congratulations. Mr. Mo, what's going on, man? Welcome. I'm actually just leaving now, rounding this up. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm not sure what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow, but if you have any topics that you want me to talk about in terms of burnout and how different topics affect burnout, then just leave a comment and I'll make sure to do a session on it. Have an amazing week, whatever you're up to. And just remember, all the good things that you feel when you're with people are not attached to the person, they're attached to you. You have access to those emotions always. And do not fall into the trap of thinking that as someone leaves, they leave with that part of you. Okay? So have an amazing day, amazing morning, afternoon, evening. Don't worry, you might have missed it, but I'm saving it as a live. Don't worry, it's going to be in here so you can watch it again. And again, put those comments because I need more topics. Have an amazing day. See ya.